The first thing Tomek Aru cut into was a door that had not been opened in 100,000 years, and the moment his torch touched it, every light on his salvage rig went out at once. He froze with the cutting beam still humming in his glove. Around him the dark was total, the kind that lived only deep inside a dead world's crust. He could hear his own breath against the inside of his helmet. He could hear the slow tick of the hull cooling behind him. He could not hear the rig anymore, and the rig was never supposed to stop. Tomek belonged to the Halcyon Reclaimers, a crew of 41 diggers who made their living pulling old metal out of corpse planets. He had 4 legs, 2 arms, and a pair of wide gray eyes built for low light, and right now, those eyes saw nothing. He counted to 10. On 9, the lights came back, but they came back wrong. They were a deep amber he had never set on the rig himself, and they were not his lights at all. They were coming from the door. The Reclaimers had been working Earth for 9 days when Tomek found the door, and for all 9 of those days the crew had quietly hated the job. It paid less than any contract they had taken in a season. The planet had nothing on its surface but gray dust and old craters, and the deep readings came back as solid mantle, no matter where they sank a bore. Senel, who ran the rig from the topside camp, had said on the 3rd night that they were drilling a tombstone for the iron in its heart, and that the only thing worse than the pay was the silence, because Earth was the quietest place any of them had ever stood. No wind, no water, no old machines ticking under the surface the way they did on most corpse worlds. Just gray, and cold, and a stillness that felt less like death, and more like patience, though none of them had said that word out loud until much later. They had taken the contract because no one else would. Digging permits for Earth were almost never granted, and when they were, they came with a clause every Accord permit carried in fine print so old it had gone brittle. The clause forbade any disturbance of the planet's interior beyond the standard bore depth. Tomek had read it 9 days ago and thought nothing of it. Everyone knew there was nothing in Earth's interior to disturb. The clause was a relic, a habit, a sentence the Accord copied onto every Earth permit out of a caution so ancient that no living clerk could say what it had originally feared. Tomek had laughed at it over dinner on the first night. Then his bore had hit something at 400 strides that was not mantle, and was not iron, and would not let the bit through, and he had gone down himself, with a hand torch and a cutting beam, to see what nothing felt like when it stopped a drill. The door was not metal the way he understood metal. It was 40 strides tall, and it had no seams, no bolts, no hinges, no marks of any tool. His cutting beam had left a single shallow scratch on its surface, no deeper than a fingernail, and even that scratch was already closing, the line of it filling in like water finding its own level. He had cut through battleship plate as if it were bread. This had stopped a beam that could split a moon, and it had healed. He ran his glove along the surface and felt no joints, no rivets, none of the honest ugliness of made things. Every machine Tomek had ever pulled out of a dead world told him a story of how it was built, where it was welded, how it had broken. This told him nothing. It was as if the door had not been built at all but grown, the way bone grows, a single piece with no inside or outside, and the longer he stared at it, the more certain he became that it was older than anything the galaxy still remembered making. He had handled relics 500,000 years old. They crumbled. This was older, and it was not crumbling, and that combination frightened him more than any weapon ever had. He pressed harder, and felt, very faintly, deep under the surface, a vibration, slow, regular. He held his breath and counted it. Once every few seconds, a low pulse, like the turning of something enormous and unhurried far below. It was not the rig. The rig was dead. It was not his own heart. He counted that separately, and it was faster and frightened. The pulse under the door belonged to the door, or to whatever the door kept, and it had the patient rhythm of a thing that had been pulsing for a very, very long time, and intended to go on pulsing long after Tomek Aru was dust. He keyed his radio. "Senel, I need you down here. Now." Static answered. Then a voice, thin and shaking. "Tomek, the surface team is gone. The ships up top went dark. Every reading we had of this planet, it just changed." He had been told, like every child of his kind, what this planet was. It had a number in the old ledgers, and a single word beside the number, and the word was the most important word in the modern galaxy. The word was dead. This was Earth. Every species that mattered knew the story by heart. 100,000 years ago, a young, loud people had risen here, built ships, pushed a little way into the black, and then gone silent. No final message, no last fleet, no war that anyone could find. They had simply stopped, the way a candle stops, and the galaxy had waited 1,000 years to be sure, and then 10,000, and then it had written the word down. Tomek had learned the story as a hatchling, the way every child of the Accord learned it, as a lesson about endings. Here is how a people dies, the lesson went. Not always in fire, sometimes in silence. The humans had been clever, the story admitted, cleverer than most young species, quick to the stars and quicker to fill them. And then, at the very edge of greatness, they had vanished, and no one knew why, and the not knowing had become a kind of comfort. If even the clever ones died for no reason, then the death of a people was simply a law of the universe, like cold, like distance. You could build on it, you could plan around it, you could carve it into stone, and never lose a night's sleep, wondering whether the dead might disagree. No body had ever been found. That was the part the lesson skipped over. In 100,000 years, no Accord expedition had ever recovered a single human remain, a single human ship, a single human bone. The official answer was that time had ground them all to dust. Tomek, kneeling in the dark before a door that healed and pulsed and had no seams, understood for the first time that there was another answer. One the lessons had never dared to speak, and the other answer was that nothing had been found, because nothing had been left to find, because the humans had not died at all. They had simply put themselves somewhere no one would think to look. Dead. And on the strength of that one word, an entire civilization had been built. They called themselves the Quiet Accord, and they were not one people but 9, bound by a single founding law. The law said that the galaxy belonged to the species who survived, and that the dead forfeited everything they had ever held. Earth had been the richest corpse of all. Its orbit, its old shipping lanes, its buried factories, its very name had been carved up and handed out, and grown into the bones of 9 empires across 40,000 systems. The Accord did not merely use Earth. The Accord was Earth's will, read aloud and rewritten by the ones who lived. And the first line of that will, the line every Accord child learned before they could walk, was simple. Humanity is dead. The dead do not return. To suggest otherwise is the only crime the Accord truly fears, because it is the one crime that could undo everything they own. Tomek Aru was a salvage engineer. He did not deal in laws. He dealt in metal. And the metal in front of him had just told him, in a language older than his entire species, that the first line of the will was a lie. He pressed his glove flat against the door. It was warm, not the cold warmth of sun-heated rock, the warmth of something that had a temperature it chose to keep. "Senel," he said quietly, "pull the old survey, the one from the first Accord landing, the founding charter survey. What does it say is under this crust?" A pause, the clatter of a panel. "It says nothing's here. Solid mantle, all the way down. 40,000 years of Accord scans, every one of them, all the same. Dead rock. The scans are wrong." He looked up. His amber-lit eyes followed the door upward into a ceiling he could not see. "There's a room behind this, a big one. My beam went in 300 strides before it lost itself. Senel, there's a space under this planet that's bigger than the planet should allow. That's not possible." "No," Tomek agreed. "It isn't, which is exactly why nobody's ever looked." He had taken this job because it paid badly and asked few questions, and because the reclaimers were the only crew small enough to slip a digging permit for Earth past the Accord's notice. Nobody dug on Earth. There was nothing to find. The Accord had certified it sterile 400 centuries ago, and stamped the certification with the seal of all 9 founding species. To request a survey of Earth was to insult the dead and waste the living. So the planet sat in its old orbit, gray and quiet, a tombstone the size of a world, and the great Accord fleets passed it by without a glance, because there was, by law, nothing there to glance at. Tomek had come for the iron in its core. He had found a door instead. He thought, briefly, about all the diggers before him. 40,000 years of Accord salvage, and not one of them had sunk a bore where his had gone, in this exact unremarkable patch of gray dust, at this exact unfashionable depth. It was luck, or it was not. He found, the longer he knelt there, that he did not believe in the luck. The door was 40 strides wide, and the planet was vast, and yet his bore had found the one spot, the one seam, the one place where the false rock ran thin enough for a digger's beam to scratch through. He would learn later that it was not the only such place. There were others, scattered across the planet, each one a knock point left thin on purpose, each one waiting for a knuckle. Earth had not hidden itself perfectly. Earth had hidden itself almost perfectly, and left a few doors slightly too easy to find, because a thing that wants to be discovered someday must leave a way to be discovered, and the humans had thought of everything, including the manner of their own return. He stepped back from it. He told himself to walk away. He told himself that whatever was healing a moon-splitting cut was not his to wake. He was a small creature with a small ship and a small life, and the galaxy had very clear rules about what happened to small creatures who disturbed the order of large empires. Tomek Aru had spent 40 years learning those rules. He had been born on a salvage barge in the rings of a half-stripped gas world, the eighth child of a digger who had never owned a thing that was not second-hand. He had learned to read the bones of dead machines before he learned to read words. He had learned, very early, that the galaxy belonged to the large and the loud, and that the safest life for a small, quiet creature was a life that touched nothing the large and the loud had decided was theirs. He had kept to that life faithfully. He had never once made trouble. He had stamped his own work with the smallest claims, taken the leanest contracts, gone where no one important would notice him, and in 40 careful years, he had built exactly the modest, unremarkable life he had been told a creature like him was allowed to want. And now he stood at the bottom of a dead world, with his hand on a door that healed, and he understood that the modest, unremarkable life was over, because there was no version of the next hour in which Tomek Aru went back to being small. He had found the largest thing in the galaxy. There was no unfinding it. He could walk away and the accord cutter would still be coming, and the seams would still be glowing, and the door would still be warm, and the universe would still have changed under his feet, whether he chose to look at it or not. The choice the galaxy's rules promised him, the choice to stay small and safe, had quietly stopped existing the moment his beam scratched the seamless metal. He found, standing there, that he was not as frightened by that as he should have been. Some part of him, the part that had spent 40 years being careful, was strangely, fiercely glad. Then the door spoke. It did not use sound. The words arrived inside his skull, in his own language, gentle and unhurried, as if they had all the time that had ever existed. "We have been counting," the door said. 100,000 years, 11 months, 9 days. You are the first to knock." Tomek Aru did not run. He was too frightened to run. He stood very still, and he asked the only question a salvage engineer could think to ask. "Knock on what?" The amber light brightened until it filled the whole shaft, and for one held breath he saw what the cavern truly was, and the sight of it took the strength out of all 4 of his legs at once. He had imagined, in the long seconds before the light came up, a tomb. He had braced for bones, for a vault, for the dignified silence of a buried thing that had finished being. He had told himself a story to be ready for it, the only story the galaxy had ever offered about Earth, the story of an ending. Diggers learned to make peace with endings. Every world he had ever opened had been an ending, a thing that had once lived and now did not, and he had grown skilled at standing among the stopped and feeling nothing but the quiet of work. He had expected, at worst, a grander ending, a bigger tomb, the largest grave in the galaxy, fitting for the largest legend. It was not a tomb. That was the thing his mind could not catch, in the first held breath of light. Tombs are still, because the thing inside them has stopped. This place was still the way a drawn bow is still, the way a held breath is still, the way a hunter in tall grass is still. It was the stillness of a thing that had not stopped at all, but had only chosen, for reasons of its own, not yet to move. And Tomek Aru, who had spent his whole life among true endings, knew the difference in his bones the instant the light showed him. The way you know the difference between a sleeping creature and a dead one without being able to say how. The galaxy had called this place dead. The galaxy had been standing on the lid of it for 100,000 years, calling it dead, never once noticing that the thing under the lid was warm. It was not a cavern, it was a birth, and it was not empty. In the amber light the birth ran out from him in both directions, until distance swallowed it, and along its floor, nose to tail, lay ships. They were not the small dead hulks Tomek pulled out of corpse worlds. They were warships, and they were enormous, each one longer than a city, gray and unmarked and whole. He counted 3, before his eyes refused to count further, and the third was so large that the first 2 stood inside its shadow, like models on a shelf. They lay in cradles of the same seamless stone as the door, and they were not rusted, not pitted, not touched by the 100,000 years that had passed above them. They looked as if their crews had walked off a moment ago and would walk back any second. He had pulled ships out of 100 dead worlds, and every one of them had told him the same story: decay, surrender, the slow, patient victory of time over metal. A ship left alone for 10,000 years became a stain, a smear of oxide, a memory the planet was busy forgetting. A ship left for 100,000 should have been nothing at all, less than dust, a chemical rumor in the rock. These ships had been here for 100,000 years, and they shone. Not with polish, with readiness. The gray of their hulls was the gray of a blade that has been kept oiled and turned in its sheath every single day by a hand that never tired. And Tomek understood, looking at them, that something down here had been tending them, all of them, for the entire age, turning them in their cradles, keeping them whole, keeping them ready, against a day that the rest of the galaxy had been taught could never come. Nothing in nature kept its edge for 100,000 years. Only a thing that was waiting did that. Only a thing that fully intended to be used again. "Senel," Tomek whispered. "How big is the cavern? Give me the number." The line crackled. He heard Senel breathing. Then, "Tomek, the scan won't close. It keeps trying to draw the wall and it can't find one. The room under Earth. It's the size of the planet's whole mantle. It goes all the way around. The crust is a shell, Tomek. There's a layer between the rock and the core, and it's full." For a moment, Tomek could not make his mouth work. He had spent his whole life inside the bones of dead worlds, and he knew what the inside of a planet was supposed to be. Rock, pressure, heat, the slow grinding patience of a world digesting its own weight. Not this. Not a hollow shell holding a fleet, kept open against a planet's whole crushing mass by a strength he could not begin to measure. The walls of the berth should not have held. The pressure that deep should have closed any cavity in an afternoon, ground it shut, filled it with melted stone. Something was holding the world open from the inside, had been holding it open for 100,000 years, against the patient, murderous weight of an entire planet, and had never once let it slip. "Senel," he said, "what's holding it up? A space that big, that deep, what's keeping the crust from falling in on it?" A long silence. Then Senel's voice, very small. "Nothing's holding it up, Tomek. There's no bracing in the scan. No pillars, no frame. The crust is just staying, like it's been told to. Like the whole planet is doing what it's told, a breath. Whatever's down there isn't holding the world open. It's telling the world to stay open, and the world is listening." "Full of what?" "I don't want to say it." "Say it." "Ships. Thousands of them. The whole inside of the world is a dock." Tomek looked at the nearest hull, at the curve of it vanishing into the dark, and he understood that he was standing inside the largest secret in the history of the galaxy. 100,000 years ago, the loud young people of Earth had not died. They had taken their entire war fleet, and they had buried it inside their own planet, under a shell of false rock that fooled every scan the galaxy ever built. And then they had gone quiet, and let the universe believe what it wanted to believe, and waited. "They did not die," the voice in his skull said, as if reading him. "They chose to be counted among the dead. It is a different thing." "A very different thing," Tomek said. His voice shook. "To everyone up there it's the same thing. Dead is dead. The Accord didn't build 40,000 systems on a maybe. They built it on a body that was never going to sit up." "Every empire is built on a body it believes will never sit up," said the voice. And there was something almost gentle in it, the way a teacher is gentle with a student who has nearly understood. "That is what an empire is. A wager that the thing you took cannot take itself back." The Quiet Accord made the largest such wager in the history of this galaxy. They wagered 40,000 systems on the certainty that the owners of Earth were gone. The amber light pulsed once. They were wrong. They have been wrong for 40,000 years, and the only reason it has not yet cost them everything is that the owners were in no hurry. Why? Tomek said, his voice cracked. Why would anyone do this? Why fake your own end, and bury your whole strength, and sit in the dark for 100,000 years? I am not permitted to answer that yet, said the voice. That answer belongs to the one who comes to take the inheritance. But I will tell you what I am. I am the warden of the stilling. I am the mind that watches the sleeping fleet. And you, small digger, have done what no instrument of the quiet accord was ever allowed to do. You have looked. Tomek's radio screamed. It was not Senel this time. It was the wide band, the band everyone shared, and on it, a voice he did not know spoke in the cold, flat tongue of the Accord enforcement arm. Unregistered vessel on the dead world. You are in violation of Founding Statute 1. Power down and prepare for inspection. An Accord verification cutter is inbound. Estimated arrival, 6 hours. Tomek closed his eyes. Of course they had a watcher in the system. The Accord did not guard Earth because there was nothing to guard, but they listened, always, for the one sound they feared, and the sound they feared was a digger's scan, finding something it should not. His scan had broadcast wide. Somewhere out in the black, a quiet little Accord cutter had caught the edge of it, seen the cavern that should not exist, and turned toward him with the patient certainty of an empire that had never once been wrong. He understood, now, why the digging permit had that brittle old clause about disturbing the interior. He understood why Earth permits were almost never granted. He understood why the one watcher in the system was not a war fleet, but a single quiet cutter, the kind you send not to fight, but to clean up. The Accord did not fear an attack on Earth. The Accord feared exactly this: a digger, a scan, a scratch in the wrong place. For 40,000 years, their entire defense of the dead world had consisted of making sure no one ever looked too closely, because some part of the Accord, buried as deep as the fleet itself, had always known that the only real threat to 40,000 systems was the truth coming up out of the ground. They had not guarded Earth from invaders. They had guarded it from being seen. And Tomek Aru, who had wanted nothing but core iron, had seen it. He had 6 hours before the Accord arrived to bury what he had found, and to bury him with it. He keyed the rig's wide channel one more time, the channel that reached the topside camp where the rest of the reclaimers were. All crew, this is Tomek. Listen to me and do not argue. Pack the camp, lift the rig. Take the longboat and burn for the system edge as hard as it will go. And do not stop. And do not come back for me. There's an Accord cutter inbound and a founding emergency in the air, and the safest place in this whole system is anywhere that is not Earth. He paused, and his voice softened. You've been a good crew, the best I've worked. Go now. That's the last order I'll ever give you, so make it count. There was a long crackle, and then Senel's voice, tight. We're not leaving you down a hole, Tomek. You are, he said. Because what's down here isn't going to need rescuing, and I'm not going to need rescuing, and the only thing you can do for me now is be far enough away to tell the truth if I can't. Somebody has to live to say what was here. Make it the 40 of you. He swallowed. Go. Please. Go. The channel was quiet for a moment. Then he heard the deep cough of the longboat's engines lighting, far above, through 40 strides of false rock and 100,000 years of patience. And he knew his crew was running, and he was glad, and he was alone. Warden, he said, there's a ship coming, an Accord ship. They'll seal this place. They'll seal me in it. They can't let anyone know what's down here. I know, said the warden. I have listened to the Accord for 40,000 years. I know every word of their founding law. I helped write the gap they built it in. You? What? The law that governs your galaxy has one line it cannot survive. Humanity is dead. The dead do not return. Everything the 9 empires own rests on that line. Every border, every title, every ship they fly was built on ground they called abandoned. The amber light pulsed, slow, almost amused. They did not realize they were building on a loan, and the lender has been awake the entire time. Tomek Aru stood between a fleet that could not exist and a law that could not bend, and he was a salvage engineer who had wanted nothing more from his life than a good price on core iron. What do you want from me? He said. I want you to carry a message, said the warden. The stilling is ending. It was always going to end the day someone looked. You looked. So now the galaxy must be told what it built itself upon. You will tell them, and because they will not believe a digger, one ship will rise to make them believe. One ship, Tomek said, looking down the endless line of buried giants. You have thousands. Yes, the warden agreed. We do, and that is why only one needs to rise. I don't understand. A fleet that sends all of itself is afraid, said the warden. It says, by its numbers, that it is not sure of any one of its ships. The Quiet Accord will send all of itself against us, and in doing so, it will tell the galaxy the truth of its own heart, which is that it has never been sure of anything it owns. We will send one, and the one will be enough, and the galaxy will see the difference, and the difference will teach more than any weapon. The amber light brightened. The lesson is not in the fleet we could send. The lesson is in the fleet we do not send. A people strong enough to drown the galaxy, who send a single ship and leave the rest asleep, have said something about themselves that 10,000 hulls could never say. They have said, we do not need to, and there is no sentence in the galaxy more fearsome than that one, spoken quietly, by a power that means it. Tomek looked down the endless berth at the thousands of sleeping giants who would not rise, who did not need to rise, and he felt the full weight of the restraint of it settle on him, and the restraint was more terrible than any fleet. Far down the berth, deep in the dark where Tomek's eyes could not reach, something changed. A line of light traced itself along a hull, faint and blue, like a vein finding a pulse. It ran the length of the ship and split and ran again, and where it spread the dust of 100,000 years, lifted and drifted away, and the great cradle of stone around the hull cracked open along seams that had been waiting an age to part. The ship that woke was the third one, the largest one, the one that held the others in its shadow. I will tell you its name, said the warden, and you will carry that name to the 9 empires, and when they hear it, they will understand that the inheritance has come home to be collected. Its name is the Long Remainder. The blue light reached the prow, and the prow opened its eyes. Tomek had no other word for it. There were no windows, no bridge, no faces. But a great slow attention moved through the hull and turned, unmistakably, toward the small creature standing at the door. And Tomek Aru felt himself looked at by something that had been looked away from for 100,000 years, and had never once minded the wait. He had been looked at by powerful things before. Accord inspectors, crime bosses on the salvage rings. Once, a war priest of the Third Empire who could have had him killed with a word. Every one of those gazes had wanted something from him, had weighed him for use or threat. This gaze wanted nothing. That was what made it terrible. The Long Remainder looked at him, the way a mountain might look at an insect that had finally crawled up to its peak after a long climb, with no hunger, and no fear, and no need, only a vast and ancient patience that had room in it, somewhere, for a small kindness. It did not need Tomek. It did not need anything. It had everything it had ever needed sleeping in the dark behind it, and it had had it for 100,000 years, and it would have it for 100,000 more. And yet it turned its whole attention to a single trembling digger, because the digger had knocked, and a thing that patient does not waste the one knock it has waited an age to hear. Senel, he said, very quietly, into a radio he was no longer sure anyone was hearing. Get the crew off the surface. Get them away from Earth, as far as the rig will go. Tomek, what's happening down there? He watched the Long Remainder lift itself out of its cradle. It did not roar, it did not burn. It simply ceased to lie down, and the stone let it go, and a ship the length of a mountain range rose into the air of the buried dock with the silence of a held breath, finally released. The dead world, Tomek said, is keeping its appointment. Above them, in the cold orbit where the gray planet turned, the crust of Earth began to glow from within, along 1,000 hidden lines, and the Accord cutter racing in to seal the secret saw, for the first time in 40,000 years of watching, the one thing its founding law swore could never happen. It saw Earth's lights come on. The cutter's captain was a careful creature named Hessel Voss, and Hessel Voss had spent a long career making sure nothing ever disturbed the dead world. She had stamped 1,000 digging permits with the word denied. She had turned back curious scholars and treasure hunters, and one foolish poet who had wanted to write Earth an elegy. She knew Earth the way a keeper knows a grave, and graves did not light up. "Sensors," she said. "Confirm. The dead world is producing energy." "Confirmed," said her sensor officer, in a voice that had stopped being professional. "Captain, the entire crust it's opening. There are seams. The planet has seams." "That is not in the survey." "No, Captain. Nothing about this is in the survey." Hessel Voss looked at the gray ball of Earth on her screen, and she watched it crack open like a seed, and somewhere very deep in her training, a single line repeated itself, the line every Accord officer swore an oath to defend, the line that the borders of 40,000 systems were drawn around. "Humanity is dead. The dead do not return. All stations," she said, and her voice did not shake, because she was a good officer, and a good officer's voice does not shake, even when the floor of the universe drops out from under it. "Signal the Accord. Highest priority. Founding emergency." "Captain, what do I tell them is happening?" Hessel Voss watched a ship the length of a mountain range climb out of a world that had been dead for 100,000 years, and she found that the founding law had no words for what she was looking at, because the founding law had been written by people who needed it to be impossible. She thought, in that moment, of all the permits she had stamped denied, the scholars she had turned back, the treasure hunters she had threatened with the full weight of Accord law, the young poet, 3 centuries ago, who had wanted only to land and write Earth a few lines of mourning, and whom she had personally escorted out of the system because the founding statute forbade even sentiment near the dead world. She had thought, every time, that she was protecting the order of the galaxy. She wondered now, watching the gray ship rise, whether she had spent her whole career standing guard over the exact secret the Accord most needed kept, and whether the brittle old clauses she enforced had been written not to honor the dead, but to keep them buried. The thought sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. "Tell them," she said, "that the inheritance is awake." The message that left Earth that hour did not travel like a signal. It arrived. In the marble hall of the First Accord, 40,000 systems away, the 9 founders were in session when the floor told them. The founders were the heads of the 9 empires, and they met in a chamber grown from a single hollowed pearl, and at the center of that chamber stood a stone tablet on which the founding law was carved in 9 scripts. The first line of the law glowed faintly, always, a soft and reassuring light, the way a heartbeat is reassuring, because you stop noticing it. The first line went dark. It did not crack. It did not break. The light simply went out of it, the way light goes out of a thing that is no longer true, and 9 founders who ruled 40,000 systems turned as one to look at the place where their certainty had lived for 40,000 years. "Humanity is dead," read the Speaker of the Accord, a tall, pale founder named Olun Marach, and his voice was the voice of a creature reading something he had never once doubted. "The dead do not return." The line stayed dark. "It is a fault in the stone," said another founder. "A flaw. Have it relit." "You cannot relight a law," said Olun Marach softly. "A law is only as bright as the truth under it." He turned to the messenger, trembling at the chamber door. "Say it again, slowly." The light in the first line of the law had never gone out, not in 40,000 years. The tablet had been grown from a single seed crystal at the founding of the Accord, and the 9 founders of that first generation had spoken the law into it line by line, and the crystal had held each line bright ever since. Brightness fed by truth, the way a flame is fed by air. Every founder who had ever sat in that chamber had taken comfort from the steady glow of the first line. It was the foundation under all the others. If humanity is dead held, then the dead forfeit held, and if the dead forfeit held, then everything the 9 empires owned was theirs by right, and the whole towering structure of 40,000 systems stood square and clean upon it. The first line going dark was not a flaw in a stone. It was the foundation of a civilization quietly informing that civilization that it had been built on sand. "The dead world," the messenger said, "Earth. It has opened. A ship has risen out of it. The cutter on station reports the planet's interior is full, Speaker, full of ships. The survey was wrong. It has always been wrong. Earth was never empty. They buried their fleet inside their own world, and let us believe they were gone." The chamber was silent. 40,000 systems worth of power, sat in 9 chairs, and said nothing, because there was nothing in the law to say. "How many ships?" asked Olun Marak. "The cutter cannot count them, speaker. The interior is the size of the mantle. The estimate is—" The messenger swallowed. "The estimate is in the tens of thousands. Whole, intact. Asleep until now." A younger founder, a sharp, restless creature named Ressa Tual, who governed the empire that held Earth's old orbit, and the richest of its abandoned lanes, stood up so fast her chair fell. "Then we have been squatting on a loaded grave for 40,000 years, she said. "Everything we built, every border, every title deed to every world we took from the dead. If they are not dead, then we own nothing," said Olun Marak. "Then every claim in the accord rests on a falsehood, and the falsehood has just woken up." He looked at the dark first line of the law. "That is why they did it. Do you see it now? They did not hide to survive. They hid to teach us a lesson that could only be taught once. They let us inherit a galaxy that was never abandoned, and they waited until we had built our entire civilization on the deed, and then they came back to ask for it." He walked the length of the chamber as he spoke, his old hands folded behind his back. "Think of how patient it is. Think of the sheer cold patience of it. A people clever enough to reach the stars. And what do they do at the height of their reach? They stop. They go quiet. They let an entire galaxy decide they are dead. Not for a year, not for a century, for 100,000 years. They watched us scan their world and find nothing. They watched us land on their moon, and read their warning, and not understand it. They watched us carve their death into stone, and draw our borders around it, and raise 9 empires on top of it. And they did nothing. They waited. For 100,000 years, they did nothing but wait, because they knew that the longer they waited, the more we would build, and the more we built, the heavier the lesson would land on the day they finally chose to stand up." He stopped, and looked at the dark line. "We have been raising our children inside a trap so old that the people who set it have been legends for 1,000 generations, and the trap has just closed. Then we destroy the one ship," Ressa Tual snapped. "We destroy it before it speaks, and we reseal the world, and we relight the stone, and nothing changes. 9 empires against one ship. The math has never been simpler." Olun Marash looked at her for a long moment. He was the oldest of the founders, and he had read more of the old human archives than any living creature. The scraps and fragments the Accord kept locked away, precisely because they made the founding law nervous. He alone had read the line the humans had left carved on the inside of Earth's moon, in a script nobody else in the Accord could read. A single sentence chiseled to outlast the species itself. He had never told anyone what it said. He told them now. "On the inside of their moon," he said, "where they knew we would land first, where they knew we would build, the humans left us a message. I have stood on it. I have read it 40 times. It says this: we are not dead. We are patient. When you have forgotten us completely, we will return to remind you why we let you forget." The chamber did not breathe. "I found it as a young founder," Olun Marachek went on, quieter now, almost to himself. 300 years ago, on the first survey of the moon's interior, when we cut into the old hollows beneath its surface, the chamber the inscription is carved in is the size of this hall. The letters are taller than I am. Whoever made them meant them to be found, and meant them to be understood, and meant them to take a long time. I brought the translation to the founders of my day, and do you know what they did? They sealed the chamber. They classified the inscription. They forbade its translation from being copied, and they told me, in this very room, that a message from the dead is a forgery by definition, because the dead do not speak, and a founder who repeats the words of a forger is himself a kind of liar. He looked around the chamber slowly, at the 8 other founders. So I held my tongue for 300 years. I let the line in the stone stay dark to me. I told myself the old founders were wise, and the whole time, on the inside of a moon we walk on every day, the people we called dead were waiting for the one of us, with the courage to believe what was carved in letters, taller than a founder. His voice caught. I was not that one. None of us were. We chose the comfortable lie for 3 more centuries, and now the patient ones have run out of patience for our cowardice, and they have stood up, and they are coming, and we have no one to blame but the comfort we chose. They planned this, Olun Marak said. 100,000 years ago, they planned the exact moment we are living in now. They knew we would find nothing. They knew we would write the word. They knew we would build a galaxy on it. And they knew that the deeper we built, the more we would have to lose on the day they stood back up. He turned to Ressa Tual. And you wish to fire the first shot at a people who planned the war before our species could speak. Tell me, Founder, if they thought to bury an entire fleet inside their own world and hide it from 40,000 years of our finest instruments, what do you imagine they thought to do about the day we would try to kill the messenger? Ressa Tual had no answer. Send the order anyway, she said at last, quietly, because she was proud and frightened and could not be both and stay still. Send the fleet. If we do nothing, we lose everything by surrender. If we fight, at least we lose it fighting. And the Accord, which had never in 40,000 years faced a thing its law could not name, did the only thing a frightened empire knows how to do. It reached for its strength. Olin Marash argued against it to the last. He stood before 8 other founders and told them, plainly, that a people who had buried a fleet inside their own planet and outweighted the entire galaxy were not a people you defeated with mass. He told them that every shot they fired would be a confession that they knew the deed was forged. He told them that the wiser course was to send no fleet at all, to send instead 9 empty ships bearing the 9 founders themselves, unarmed, to meet the risen owner and ask, simply, what it wanted. He was the oldest and the most respected voice in the Accord, and the chamber heard him out in silence, and then, because fear is louder than wisdom in a frightened room, the chamber voted against him 8-1. The order went out across 40,000 systems, and the strength of the Quiet Accord turned toward a gray world it had certified dead, and the strength of the Quiet Accord was vast. 9 empires emptied their home fleets. The number that gathered above Earth over the next 6 hours was a number the Accord had never assembled in one place in all its history, because it had never once needed to. 212,000 warships, the combined wall of 9 civilizations, every hull they could spare, and many they could not, called home from 40,000 systems to put down a single ship before it could speak a single word. Across 40,000 systems, the ordinary creatures of the Accord watched it happen. The order to empty the home fleets could not be hidden, and the reason for it could not be hidden either, because the dead world's lights had been seen, and the single risen ship had broadcast on every channel, and a truth that large does not stay in a council chamber. So they watched. On a billion worlds, ordinary creatures who had never thought once in their lives about the founding law looked up from their work and their meals and their children and learned, all at once, that the galaxy they lived in had been borrowed from a people they had been taught were dust. Some did not believe it. Some wept. Some, the oldest and most thoughtful of them, felt a strange quiet settle over them, the feeling of a long-asked question finally answered, because there had always been something wrong with the story of Earth, something too neat, and now they knew what it was. The story had been too neat because it had been written by the ones who profited from it. The truth was messier and stranger and infinitely kinder, and it was rising out of the ground in real time for the whole galaxy to see. They came in waves, folding out of the dark in formations that had been drilled for 40,000 years and never once used in earnest. The first to arrive were the fast cutters of the inner empires, and they fanned out around Earth in a loose net, and their captains looked at the gray planet with its closing seams and its single risen ship, and reported, one after another, that the target had not moved, had not fired, had not so much as raised a shield. Then came the heavy lines, the battle walls, ships a third the length of the long remainder, but 1,000 strong, and they formed up rank on rank, until the space around Earth was a sphere of hulls, so dense that the gray world at its center could no longer see its own stars. And still they came. From 40,000 systems they came, until the number climbed past 200,000, until 9 empires had committed everything that could fly to the killing of one ship, and the one ship simply hung there in the heart of it all, patient as the world it had risen from, and waited for them to finish gathering. The warden had carried Tomek up. He did not know how. One moment he had been at the bottom of the world with his hand on the door, and the next, the door had opened, fully, soundlessly, and a column of the amber light had risen around him, and lifted him through 40 strides of false rock, and out through a seam in the crust, into the gray daylight of Earth's dead surface, and set him down beside his abandoned rig, as gently as a hand setting down a cup. His crew was long gone, burning for the system edge. The rig still had power, and a cracked screen, and a wideband receiver, and from that ruined little machine, Tomek Aru watched the largest fleet in the history of the galaxy assemble in the sky, over his head, to kill the thing that had just carried him to safety. He should have run too. He knew it. The warden had given him a clear path to the longboat, and he had not taken it, because some stubborn knot in him refused to be the creature who knocked on the largest door in the galaxy, and then fled before it opened. He had found this. He had woken this. Whatever happened next, he was going to watch it happen, with his own wide gray eyes, even if those eyes were the last thing he ever used them for. Tomek Aru watched them come on his rig's cracked screen, watched the count climb past 100,000 and keep climbing, and he turned to the great gray shape that hung above the opened world. "They're bringing everything," he said. "All of it. Every ship the 9 empires own. For you. One of you." "I know," said the long remainder. It was the first time the ship itself had spoken, and its voice was not the warden's gentle patience. It was deeper, older, and underneath the calm of it ran something Tomek had no word for, a thing that was not anger, and was not pride, but had room in it for both. "They have brought the whole inheritance, to the steps of the house they took it from. That is convenient. It will save us the trouble of visiting each of them." "There are 200,000 of them," Tomek said, "and one of you." "There are 200,000 of them," the ship agreed, "and they have come a long way to learn a simple thing." He felt the great attention of it settle on him, gentle now, almost kind. "Small digger, you ask the warden why we buried ourselves. I will answer you, because you are the one who knocked, and the one who knocks is owed the truth." The long remainder turned its prow toward the gathering wall of 200,000 ships, and it began, slowly, to climb out of Earth's air and into the black. "We did not hide because we were weak," the ship said. "We hid because we were strong, and because a strong people who never leaves is never tested, and a people who is never tested forgets what it is. So we left the galaxy a gift. We left it empty, and watched what it would build. We wanted to see what the young species would make of a house whose owners had gone. The prow cleared the last of the atmosphere. We hoped they would build something worth coming home to." "And did they?" Tomek asked. The long remainder looked at the wall of 212,000 warships that had come to silence a single voice, and Tomek felt the sorrow in the old ship like a weight pressing on the floor of the world. "They built a law that forbids the dead to return," the ship said, "so that they would never have to give anything back. They built 40,000 systems on the promise that no one was coming home, and when one ship stood up, they emptied 9 empires to put it down." He felt the ship draw a breath that no ship needed to draw. No, they did not build something worth coming home to, not yet. But that is what we are for. We were never meant to punish them, Digger. We were meant to remind them, and a reminder is a kinder thing than a war. The 200,000 ships of the Quiet Accord locked their weapons on the single gray hull rising out of the dead world, and across 40,000 systems, the dark first line of the founding law waited to be proven true or false forever. The long remainder stopped climbing. It hung alone before the largest fleet ever gathered in the history of the galaxy, one ship against the strength of 9 empires, and it did not raise a weapon, and it did not raise a shield, and it spoke on every channel the Accord owned at once, in every one of the 9 tongues, in a voice that 40,000 systems heard inside their own skulls. "The inheritance is recalled," the long remainder said. "You have kept the house well enough. Now stand aside while the owner comes in." Ressa Tual gave the order to fire, and 212,000 warships obeyed. Tomek Aru had seen battles. Small ones, scavenger fights over a wreck, a handful of ships trading fire across a corpse field. He had no frame for what he saw now. The whole black sky above Earth lit white at once, a sheet of fire so wide it had edges, only because the eye refused to accept that it did not. Every weapon 9 empires owned, discharged in the same heartbeat, at the same single point, and the single point was the long remainder, and the light of it would have blinded Tomek if his rig had not blacked the screen to save his eyes. When the screen cleared, The long remainder had not moved. It was not that the fire missed. Tomek watched the recording back later, frame by frame, and he saw that the fire did not miss. Every shot of 212,000 ships found the gray hull. They simply did not arrive. Not stopped, not deflected, not absorbed by any shield he could see. They reached a line 1,000 strides out from the hull, and they ended. Every beam and every shell and every torpedo ended the way a sentence ends. Completed and over. As if the space around the long remainder had quietly decided that the firing had already happened long ago, and there was no need to let it happen again. The Accord gunners did not understand it, and their not understanding came through on the open band in a rising tide of confused voices. A shot that misses leaves a record of missing. A shot stopped by a shield leaves a flare, a discharge, a wound in the defense you can measure and target again. These shots left nothing. The gunnery officers watched their own weapons fire true, watched the tracks run clean to the target, and watched the tracks simply stop existing 1,000 strides short, with no flash, no impact, no sign that anything had been there to stop them. One officer fired the same gun 9 times at the same point, and got the same nothing 9 times, and on the 10th he stopped firing and sat very still, because he had understood, before his commanders did, that he was not shooting at a ship, he was shooting at a decision. And the decision had already been made, long ago, by something that did not consider his guns relevant to it. On our world, the long remainder said, in the silence, after the largest barrage in the history of the galaxy, we learned a long time ago that a fight is a conversation about who is allowed to be certain. You are very certain, I understand. You have been certain for 40,000 years. Let me show you what certainty costs when it is wrong. The long remainder did not fire back. Tomek waited for it. He braced for it, certain that the answer to 200,000 ships would be a weapon out of legend, a beam that split fleets, a wave of fire to match the wave of fire. It never came. Instead, the great gray hull simply moved, and the moving was the thing that broke the accord. It went forward. One ship, into a wall of 212,000, and the wall could not stop it, because the wall's weapons reached the line 1,000 strides out, and ended there, and so the Accord did the only thing left, and tried to close around it, to crush it under sheer mass, 200,000 hulls collapsing inward to bury one, and the long remainder passed through them. It did not ram, it did not burn a road, it passed through the Accord fleet the way a thought passes through a held breath, and the ships it passed did not die. That was the part Tomek would remember longest. 212,000 warships had come to kill, and the thing they had come to kill walked into the middle of them, and harmed not one of them, and somehow that was worse than any slaughter, because slaughter they could have understood. A weapon that killed them would have been a weapon. This was something else. This was a landlord walking through a house full of tenants who had forgotten whose house it was, opening doors, looking at what they had done with the place, touching nothing, and the tenants discovering all at once that they could not make him leave. Where the long remainder passed, ships went quiet, not destroyed, stilled. Their weapons would not arm. Their engines turned over and produced nothing. Their crews sat in bridges that still had air and light and gravity, and watched their own controls answer to a different hand. One by one, in a widening ring, 212,000 warships of the Quiet Accord forgot how to fight, and not a single one of them took a scratch, and that mercy was a sentence heavier than any wound. There was a particular cruelty in how careful it was. The long remainder did not slam through the formations and let the panicking ships collide. It stilled them in order, gently, the nearest first, so that no two ships ever drifted into one another, so that no crew was ever endangered even by the chaos of their own retreat. Where formations had bunched too close, the gray ship eased them apart, nudging hulls aside with a pressure no instrument could name, opening lanes so that nothing struck anything. It was housekeeping. It was a parent moving sleeping children out of a doorway. 212,000 warships had come to commit the largest act of violence in the history of the galaxy, and the thing they had come to destroy was tidying them, tucking them in, making sure that in the middle of their failed war, not one of them came to harm. The Accord crews wept on their stilled bridges, some of them, not from fear but from the unbearable gentleness of it, because there is no shame so total as being spared by the enemy you came to murder. One empire would not accept it. The third of the 9, an old proud people called the Seminar, who held the system's nearest Earth's old core lanes, had a weapon they had never used, a thing they had built in secret across 10,000 years, against the day a rival empire might threaten their lanes. It was called the Unmaker, and it did not destroy matter so much as cancel it, unwriting whatever it struck back to the empty space it had occupied before it existed. The Seminar High Admiral, a hard old creature, who had argued loudest for the killing of the one ship, gave the order to fire the Unmaker into the long remainder, while the gray hull was still threading the stilled fleet, while it was surrounded and slowed, and, the Admiral was certain, vulnerable. The Unmaker fired. It was the most powerful weapon the Quiet Accord had ever built. 10,000 years of fear made into a single beam, and it crossed the distance to the long remainder in an instant, and it reached the line 1,000 strides out, and it did not unwrite the ship. The ship unwrote it. The beam simply was not, the way a word is not after you have decided not to say it, and the Seminar Unmaker, the secret terror of an empire, the weapon 10,000 years in the building, ended 1,000 strides short of a hull it never touched, and left no mark, and the long remainder did not even slow. It was, Tomek thought, the most frightening thing he had yet seen, because it was the Accord's best, its very best, the thing it had hidden away for the worst possible day, and the gray ship had answered it with less effort than a creature spends blinking. It's not killing them, Tomek breathed. Warden, it's not killing them. They just fired something that erases matter, and it didn't even notice. No, said the Warden, in his skull. Why would it? The dead cannot be taught. The long remainder has not come to make more dead. It has come to make the living understand. A lesson requires a student who survives it. And as for the weapon, the Warden added, and there was something almost sad in it. The Seminar spent 10,000 years building a thing to erase whatever they feared. They never once asked whether the thing they feared might simply decline to be erased. That is the whole sickness of your Accord in one weapon. You built your entire strength on the assumption that what you pointed at will agree to die. On the bridge of the cutter, Captain Hessel Voss watched her own ship go silent around her, watched her weapons lock and her engines die, and she did not give an order, because there was no order to give. She had spent her whole life guarding a grave. Now the grave had stood up and walked past her without harming her, and she understood, with the clean, awful clarity of a creature watching the floor of the universe rearrange itself, that she had been guarding the wrong thing. She had thought she was keeping the galaxy safe from what was inside Earth. She had been keeping Earth's debtors from learning they owed. Captain, whispered her sensor officer. It's not firing. Why isn't it firing? We fired everything. Why isn't it firing back? Because it doesn't need to, said Hessel Voss. We are not its enemy. We never were. We are its tenants. You do not fire on your own house. She watched the gray hull move serenely through the heart of the fleet that had emptied 9 empires to stop it. It is simply collecting the rent. On a heavy battle wall called the Steady Hand, deep in the 3rd rank of the Accord sphere, a young gunner named Pell Oren sat at a station that would no longer answer him, and watched the gray ship come. He was 19 years old. He had joined the fleet because his world was poor and the fleet fed you, and he had never expected to fire his guns at anything more dangerous than a smuggler. Now he sat before the largest battle in the history of the galaxy, his weapon dead under his hands, and he watched a single ship walk through 200,000 of his own, and he was not afraid, which surprised him, because he had always assumed he would be afraid. Instead, he felt something he had no name for, a kind of awe so total it left no room for fear, the feeling of a small creature standing in the presence of a thing so far beyond him that even its mercy was too large to fully see. He had heard the broadcast, like everyone. He had heard the word inheritance, and the word borrowed, and the word keep it. He did not understand all of it. He was a gunner from a poor world, not a founder. But he understood the part that mattered, the part you did not need to be wise to understand, which was that the thing coming through the fleet could have killed him in an instant, and had chosen, deliberately, ship by ship, not to. Pell Oren watched the gray hull pass within 1,000 strides of the Steady Hand, close enough that it filled the whole forward screen, close enough that he could see there were no scars on it, no weapons run out, no aggression in the way it moved, only a vast and unhurried purpose. And as it passed, he did a thing he could never afterward explain. He took his hands off his dead guns, and he laid them flat on the console, palms down, the old gesture of his poor world that meant, "I hold nothing against you," and he whispered, to a ship that could not possibly hear a single gunner among 200,000, "Thank you for letting us keep it." And the gray ship, which heard everything, slowed a fraction as it passed the steady hand, just a fraction, just for him, and a warmth moved through Pel Orin that he would feel for the rest of his life and would never once manage to describe to anyone, and then it was gone, on through the fleet. And Pel Orin sat with his palms flat on his dead console and wept, and was not ashamed, because every other crew on every other ship in the third rank was weeping too, 200,000 warriors brought to tears not by defeat, but by being spared. And there is no sound in the galaxy quite like the silence of an armada that has just been forgiven all at once. In the marble hall 40,000 systems away, the 9 founders watched the same feed, and one by one the certainty went out of them, the way the light had gone out of the law. Ressa Tual watched her empire's home fleet fall silent, and she put her hand on the dark first line of the founding law, as if she could relight it with her palm, and she could not, and she sank into her fallen chair and stayed there. Only Olun Marak stood. "It is doing exactly what the moon promised," he said softly. "It is reminding us, look at what it does not do." He pointed at the feed, at the vast, peaceful procession of a single ship through a stilled armada. 212,000 ships. It could have ended us in the time it has taken me to speak. It has ended no one. It walks through the largest fleet in our history, and it leaves every crew alive to watch. Do you understand what that means, Founder Tual? It means it is not afraid of us. It means it was never afraid of us. A thing that is afraid kills. A thing that is certain teaches. He had spent 300 years preparing, without knowing it, for this exact hour. Every locked archive he had read in secret, every fragment of the human record he had pieced together against the disapproval of the founders who came before him. Every night he had lain awake, turning over the inscription in the moon, and wondering what a people meant when they carved, "We let you forget," into stone taller than a founder, had been preparation for the moment when the dead world finally stood up, and someone in the chamber had to be ready to understand it. He was the only one ready. He felt the weight of that, the loneliness of it, the terrible gift of having believed the unbelievable thing long enough that when it came true he was not destroyed by it. The other founders were destroyed. He could see it in them, the hollowing, the collapse of the certainty that had held them upright their whole lives. Only Olun Marak stood, because only Olun Marak had let the certainty go a long time ago, quietly, in the dark of his own study, and learned to stand on something else instead. He had learned to stand on the truth, and the truth, it turned out, held a creature up far better than any comfortable lie. "Then what does it want?" Ressa Tual said hollowly. "If not our deaths, what does it want?" She had spent her whole life believing in mass. She governed the empire that held Earth's old orbit, the richest of the 9, grown fat on lanes that humanity had charted and Earth had abandoned, and she had always told herself that the wealth was hers, because her people had earned it by surviving. Survival was the only law she had ever truly believed in. The strong inherit. The dead forfeit. She had said the words 10,000 times, and meant them every time. And now she sat in a fallen chair and watched the strong inherit nothing. Watched 212,000 survivors fall silent before one ship that refused to kill them. And the only law she had ever believed in turned to ash in her hands. She had brought the largest fleet in history to a fight, and discovered there was no fight, only a debt, and the holder of the debt did not even want it paid. That, somehow, was the most frightening thing of all. You can fight an enemy who wants your worlds. You cannot fight one who hands them back. The answer came on every channel at once, in 9 tongues, and 40,000 systems heard it. "I want you to know that you never owned it," said the long remainder. "The worlds, the lanes, the name of Earth in your ledgers. You never owned any of it. You borrowed a galaxy from a people you called dead, and you built your whole law on the hope that the owner would never come home." The gray hull came to rest at last in the exact center of the stilled fleet. 212,000 silent ships hanging around it like a held breath. "I have come home, and I find the house standing, and the tenants well fed, and the deed forged. So now you will learn the thing the stilling was built to teach." "And what is that?" Olun Marash said aloud, to a screen that could not hear him, though somehow he knew it heard. "That, we let you keep it," said the long remainder. The whole hall went still. Olun Marash lowered himself slowly into his chair. He was very old, and he had read more of the locked human archives than any creature alive, and in that moment, all the scraps and fragments he had spent a long life puzzling over arranged themselves at last into a single shape, and the shape was so much larger and so much kinder than anything he had imagined that it took the breath out of him. He had always read the human record as the record of a vanished people. He understood now that he had been reading the record of a decision. Everything the humans had left behind, every silence, every empty world, every warning carved where it would be found too late, had been part of one enormous, patient, deliberate gift, offered across 100,000 years by a people who could have ruled the galaxy and chose instead to lend it. "We could have stayed," the ship said. "We could have filled the galaxy ourselves and left no room for you to rise. Instead, we went into the dark inside our own world, and we gave you 40,000 years of empty sky, and you filled it, and you grew, and you became 9 empires where there had been none. Everything you are because we stepped aside. That is the inheritance, not the world's, the stepping aside." And then the long remainder showed them. It opened, somehow, a window in the minds of every creature across 40,000 systems at once. And into that window it poured the thing it had kept for 100,000 years, the memory of the last days of human Earth, and the galaxy saw it. Tomek saw it on his cracked rig. Hessel Voss saw it on her stilled bridge. The 9 founders saw it in their marble hall. Every crew of every silent warship saw it, and every child on every world of the Accord saw it. The same vision, the same 100,000-year-old truth, delivered without a single word. They saw a green world, blue with water, loud with life. They saw a young people who had reached the stars and found them empty, system after system, world after world, all of it unclaimed, all of it theirs for the taking. They saw the humans stand at the edge of that emptiness, with the whole galaxy laid open before them. And they saw the humans make a choice that no other species in the long history of the stars had ever made. They saw a people decide that a galaxy taken is a galaxy that must forever be held, and that a people who must forever hold becomes, in time, a people who can do nothing else. And they saw the humans turn away from the easy infinite conquest, and go home, and build a dock inside their own world, and lie down in the dark, and give the stars away to whoever came next, on a single unspoken condition, the only rent they ever asked. Remember that it was given, that was all. Remember, when you are great, that your greatness was a gift, and you will never become the thing we refuse to become. The vision closed. 40,000 systems came back to themselves, shaking, weeping, changed, and into the silence, the long remainder spoke the rest of it, and in the softening of its voice was a thing older than any empire in the chamber. "We are not here to take the galaxy back. We are here to make you understand it was a gift. A people that thinks it took the stars will die defending them. A people that knows the stars were given will learn to give them on." Tomek Aru, alone on his cracked rig above the open world, listened to a dead people forgive a galaxy that had buried them, and he found that all 4 of his legs were shaking, and that his wide gray eyes were wet, and that he did not care. "Warden," he said, "what happens now?" "Now," said the warden, "the owner says the one thing that will outlast all of us. And then, the owner goes home. And you, small digger, carry the proof that it happened, so that no law ever forgets again." The long remainder spoke its last word to the 9 empires, and 40,000 systems heard it, and no one who heard it ever forgot. "Keep it," the ship said. That was all. 2 syllables, in 9 tongues, in every skull across the Accord at once. Keep it, the galaxy you were given, the worlds, the lanes, the empty sky you filled. Keep it. After 100,000 years in the dark, after rising alone before 212,000 guns, after walking through the largest fleet in history and harming no one, the owner of everything stood in the center of its recalled inheritance and gave it all back with a single word. For a long moment nothing moved. 212,000 silent ships hung in the black around one gray hull, and 40,000 systems held their breath, and the dark first line of the founding law waited in its marble hall. Then, slowly, the Accord ships came back to life. Their weapons unlocked, their engines caught, their controls answered to their own hands again. The long remainder gave them back themselves the way it had taken them, gently, one by one, a widening ring of restored ships, and as each ship woke, its crew found their weapons would arm, and their engines would burn, and they were free to fight if they chose. 212,000 ships returned to full strength, facing one. The math Ressa Tual had loved so much was simple again. 200,000 against one. Not a single ship fired. They had seen what the firing was worth. They had emptied 9 empires into a single point, and watched it end at a line 1,000 strides out. They had tried to crush one hull under all their mass, and watched it walk through them untouched. And then they had watched that hull give them back their own ships unharmed, and hand them a galaxy and say keep it. And there was not a crew in all the Accord that could lift a weapon against that. You cannot fire on a thing that has already forgiven you. There is nowhere for the shot to land. Some of them powered down their weapons on their own, without orders. One ship and then a dozen, and then 1,000. Captains across 9 empires reaching the same decision in the same breath. It spread through the fleet like a tide going out, where a moment before, there had been 212,000 armed hulls bristling at a single target. There was now a great slow darkening of weapon lights, rank after rank, as the largest fleet in history quietly laid down its arms before the one ship it had come to kill. No order had been given. No surrender had been demanded. The long remainder had asked for nothing. The crews simply could not hold a weapon up any longer, the way you cannot hold your arm raised forever. And one by one they let it fall. And the falling was the truest thing the Accord had ever done. Captain Hessel Voss sat on the bridge of her restored cutter and looked at the gray ship that had spared her, and she did the only thing her whole life had prepared her to do. She had spent 40 years guarding a grave. She knew how to stand watch, so she stood watch. She powered down her weapons, all of them, deliberately, where the long remainder could see, and she sent on the open band, in the clear, a single word in the old human script she had found on the inside of the moon, and learned in secret, because something in her had always known the grave was not as empty as the law said. The word she sent was, welcome. The long remainder heard it. Tomek, watching, felt the great old attention of the ship turn toward the small cutter and rest there, and he felt, unmistakably, that the ship was pleased. You read our moon, the long remainder said, on a private band, to Hessel Voss alone. Few did, fewer understood. You understood. Then you will know what the rest of the inscription says, the part your law never copied down. I never reached the end of it, Hessel Voss said quietly. The carving runs into a crater. I could never read the last line. The last line says this, said the long remainder. When we return, we will not return to rule. We will return to see if anyone learned to keep a house without forgetting who built it. The ship paused. You remembered, Keeper. One of you remembered. That is enough. That was always all we asked. In the marble hall, the 9 founders watched the feed in silence, and Olin Marak walked to the stone tablet and laid his old hand on the dark first line of the founding law. Humanity is dead. The dead do not return. He looked at it for a long time. Then he spoke to the chamber, and his voice carried to 40,000 systems, because some words are too large to keep in one room. We will not relight it, he said. We will not pretend the lie was true. We will carve a new first line, and the new first line will say what is true. And the truth is this. He drew a breath. Humanity gave us the stars. We mistook the gift for a grave. We will not make that mistake again. Ressa Tual stood up from her fallen chair. She was proud, and she had wanted the war, and she had watched the war end without a single shot, because the enemy refused to be an enemy. She walked to the tablet, and stood beside Olun Marash, and she looked at the dark line, and she said, in a voice gone quiet and changed, add this also, that on the day the owner came home, it found us building, and it let us keep building. Add that we did not earn the mercy. Add that we will spend the rest of our age trying to. And the Accord, which had been built on a lie for 40,000 years, began the slow work of building itself again on something harder and truer. And the work of it would outlast every creature in that hall, and that was the point. The work was not quick, and it was not clean. There were founders who fought it, who argued that the dead world had merely tricked them, that the gift was a story, and the truth was simply that one terrible ship had cowed 9 empires and let them go for reasons of its own. There were whole worlds that refused for years to believe any of it, that called the recording a forgery, that went on teaching their children the old first line, until the children grew up and went looking, and found the moon's inscription for themselves, and came home changed. Belief moved slowly across 40,000 systems, the way light moves, the way truth always moves, through a thing that does not want it. But it moved, and every place it reached, something in the way that place held itself shifted, a small straightening, a quiet humility, the posture of a people who had just learned that the ground they stood on had been lent to them by someone kind enough never to ask for it back. Above Earth, the long remainder turned its prow back toward the open world. "I am going home now," it said, to all of them, in 9 tongues, "one last time. The others will sleep on. They do not need to rise. One was enough. One was always going to be enough." The gray hull began its descent toward the lit seams of the buried dock. "Keep the house. We will be listening, not to judge you, to see what you become. We have waited 100,000 years. We are very good at waiting, and we are patient enough to hope." Before it reached the seams, it paused once more, and turned a fraction of its attention toward the small accord cutter that had powered down its weapons and sent the word welcome in the old human script, and it spoke to HFY a last time, on the private band, where only she could hear. "Keeper," it said, "you guarded our grave for 40 years, and you guarded it well, and the thing you guarded it from was never an enemy but the truth. That is not your shame. You were given a lie, and told it was a duty, and you did the duty faithfully, and when the truth finally rose, you were the one who laid down your weapons first, and said the kind word." The voice gentled. "The accord will need keepers still, not of graves, of memory. See that the story is kept true when the digger grows old, and the founders die, and the easy lie tries to grow back, as easy lies always do. You know how to stand watch. Stand watch over this." "I will," said HFY, and she meant it more than she had ever meant her oath to the founding law, because this was an oath she had chosen, and not inherited, and she would keep it for the rest of her long life, and she would teach it to those who came after, and the memory of the dead world's mercy would never go untended in the accord again, as long as a keeper drew breath. Then the ship stopped. It turned, one last time, the whole great length of it, toward the cracked little salvage rig, where a small 4-legged digger sat with wet gray eyes, and the long remainder spoke to Tomek Aru alone. "Small digger," it said, "you knocked. Of every creature in a galaxy of 40,000 systems, you are the one who touched the door. That is not nothing. That is the whole of it. Someone always has to knock, or the owner never knows to come home." "I only wanted the iron," Tomek said, and laughed, and the laugh was half a sob. "I know," said the long remainder, and there was warmth in it. Real warmth, the warmth of a thing older than empires that had not stopped being kind. "Take the iron, take all of it. The core of Earth is yours, reclaimer, with the thanks of the people who built the dock around it. But first carry the record. Carry it to every world that will listen. Tell them what you saw. Tell them the dead world was never dead. Tell them it gave the galaxy back, and tell them why." The attention of the ship settled on him, soft as a hand. "Because a people that is remembered kindly has no need to rule. We would rather be remembered than obeyed. See that they remember, and we will never need to rise again." "I will," Tomek Aru said. "I promise. I'll tell all of them." "Then it is done," said the long remainder. "And the stilling ends not in war, but in a word, carried home by a digger who only wanted the iron. That is a better ending than we planned. You improved it, small one. Thank you." The gray ship sank into the lit seams of the world, and the seams closed behind it, slow and gentle, like eyes going to sleep. The lights of Earth dimmed one by one, along 1,000 hidden lines, until the planet was gray and quiet again, a tombstone the size of a world, except that now everyone who looked at it knew that it was not a tombstone at all. It was a door. And behind the door, an entire fleet slept on, patient and whole, waiting in the dark not to conquer, but to be remembered well enough that it never had to wake again. 212,000 Accord warships hung in the black above the closed world. Not one of them had fired a successful shot. Not one of them had been destroyed, and every crew aboard them flew home to 40,000 systems, carrying the same impossible truth, the same single word, the gift and the warning folded into one. The Seminar High Admiral who had fired the Unmaker did not fly home at once. He sat on his bridge for a long time after the gray ship sank back into the world, looking at the place where his empire's 10,000-year secret had ended 1,000 strides short of a hull that never noticed it. And he thought about everything he had believed, and everything he had built, and everything he had nearly done in the name of a lie. Then he sent a message to the other 8 empires, in the clear, on the open band, where any creature in 40,000 systems could hear it, and the message was short. He said, "I fired our worst weapon at a people who gave us the stars, and they declined to die, and they spared me anyway. I have nothing left to defend. From this day the seminar lanes are open. Let anyone pass who remembers why. It was the first border in the Accord to fall, and it would not be the last. And history would remember that the hardest of the 9 had been the first to lay his armor down, because the hard ones, when they finally bend furthest." Keep it. Tomek Aru flew his cracked little rig out of Earth's orbit with the full record in his hold, and the whole core of a world promised to his crew, and he did exactly what he had promised. He carried it to every world that would listen, and many that did not want to, and he told them, in his plain digger's voice, what he had seen. He told them about the door that healed. He told them about the dock the size of a mantle. He told them about one gray ship that walked through the strength of 9 empires, and harmed no one, and gave it all back with a word. And when they asked him, as they always asked, whether the dead would rise again, whether the sleeping fleet would come for them, Tomek Aru gave the only answer he had. "They already came," he said, "once. They looked at what we built on top of them, and they decided to let us keep it, and they went back to sleep. So the only question that's left is the one they left us with." He would pause there, every time, 4 gray eyes on whatever crowd had gathered, and he would say the last of it slow, so it landed. "They're patient enough to hope. The question is whether we're worth the hope. They're listening. Make sure they like what they hear." He told it on 1,000 worlds, and the telling changed him. The careful small creature who had spent 40 years touching nothing the great considered theirs, became, without ever meaning to, the most listened-to voice in 40,000 systems, because he was the one who had knocked, and a galaxy that had just learned the value of remembering wanted to remember from the one who was there. He never grew comfortable with it. He never stopped being a digger at heart. He kept the cracked old rig long after he could have bought a fleet, and he kept it because it had been beside him at the door, and some things you do not trade away no matter what you are offered. The galaxy he carried the truth across was not the galaxy he had been born into. The change did not come all at once, and it did not come everywhere, and there were dark, stubborn corners where the old comfort clung on for generations. But it came. Borders that had been drawn around a lie grew soft once the lie was known, because a border is only a border, while everyone agrees to fear what is on the other side of it, and the Accord had run out of things to fear. The lanes that humanity had charted and Earth had abandoned, the lanes 9 empires had killed over for 40,000 years, opened one by one as the seminar lanes had opened, until a creature could fly from the edge of one empire to the heart of another, and never once be asked whose ground he stood on, because everyone had finally learned whose ground it had always been, and the answer humbled the asking right out of them. They changed how they raised their young, in the end. That was the deepest mark the dead world left. The old lessons had taught children that survival was the highest law, that the strong inherit and the weak forfeit, that the galaxy belongs to whoever is still standing when the dust settles. The new lessons taught something harder. They taught that the galaxy is borrowed. They taught that everything a people holds was handed to it by someone who came before, and will be handed on to someone who comes after, and that the only question that ever truly matters is whether you keep the house well enough that the next ones inherit something worth having. Children across 40,000 systems grew up knowing that a fleet slept inside a gray world, patient and whole and listening, not as a threat, but as a promise. The way a child might grow up knowing a kind grandparent watched over the family from a quiet room, and the knowing made them gentler, and the gentleness made them strong, in a way the old certainty never had. He went back to Earth once, near the end of his life, alone. He landed on the gray dust above the closed seam and sat for a long while in the silence that was not death but patience. And he put his old glove flat against the ground, and he felt, very faintly, deep below, the slow regular pulse he had felt the first time, once every few seconds, unhurried, the breathing of a fleet that slept and listened and waited and hoped. He did not knock again. There was no need. He only sat with it, the way you sit with an old friend who does not require talking, and after a time he said, quietly, to the world and the fleet and the warden who he knew was counting still, "We're trying. I want you to know that. We're not perfect at it. But we're trying, and I think, mostly, you would be glad." And the pulse went on, slow and steady and content, and Tomekaru took that for an answer, and flew home, and lived out his days, and died old and remembered, which is the only kind of immortality the dead world had ever wanted for anyone. And across 40,000 systems, on a tablet of stone in a hall grown from a single pearl, where for 40,000 years a lie had glowed, a new first line was carved in 9 scripts, and it was the truest line the Quiet Accord ever wrote, and it read, "The dead world was never dead. It gave us the stars, and asked only that we remember. Let us be worth remembering." Far below the gray crust of Earth, in the dark of a dock the size of a world, an entire fleet slept on, whole and patient and listening, and the warden of the stilling kept its long count in the silence, and was, for the first time in 100,000 years, content to keep counting. Because someone had knocked, and the owner had come home, and found that, after all the long waiting, the house was worth keeping after all.